and welcome. I'm Joshi with the Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organization, and today is our inaugural show, and I'm very pleased. For this special event, we are joined by Dorian Brewer,
Hi.
One of the original co-founders of P.E.R.R.O. And I thought that for today's show, since we're just getting started, it would be really nice to learn a bit about how P.E.R.R.O. began. Maybe not everybody knows who P.E.R.R.O. is or what P.E.R.R.O. does, but Dorian, you were here from the beginning.
Right, yeah, I was.
Could you tell us a little bit about why you were in Pilsen and what was going on at that point in your life? I think we're going back now to the early 2000s.
Yeah. I moved back to Chicago from abroad where I was living in 1999. I started looking around for what neighborhood. I got a job in Chicago. I was looking around for what neighborhood would I want to live in. And my brother was nice enough to let me crash on his couch for a few months while I sort of investigated neighborhoods. And yeah, found Pilsen and found, I think my second choice was Lincoln Square, but anyway. Pilsen reminded me of growing up. I was born and raised until age 7 in Mexico, so it kind of like the carts in particular and some of the stores. I mean, I instantly, felt at home in Pilsen actually, so couldn't wait to get going. So then I did a lengthy process of looking for an apartment, found an apartment. So 2000, moved to Pilsen, and then soon after, it was a year of election and started getting involved in politics, in my case in the Green Party, supporting Ralph Nader, and met people like Jack Ailey, and Jack and I together started a local group for the presidential campaign of the Green Party, right in 2000 then, in support of the election. And after the election, unfortunately for us, in Jack's, in my opinion, Ralph Nader didn't win, but we thought we would keep going with the kind of issues that were raised, environmental issues, changing the status quo for the better of all people, but particularly people who don't have a lot of luck, it would seem, or we felt. Anyway, so we kept it going. There was a group of maybe 25 people who had gotten together in that neighborhood and around, and so we kept it going. We called it the Pilsen Southwest Side Local of the Green Party, and we said, okay, the election's over, what's our next issue? We started tackling various issues. Jerry Mead joined around that period. And we did things like the V&V Supremo Cheese Company, which is like a block away from my house in Pilsen, was having a strike. We supported the strike. There was the Catholic bishop in Chicago was, or there was work on a healthcare issue to improve access to healthcare. We worked on that.
So it sounds like you were more broadly based community activists and labor and health.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. But then one of the issues was this huge coal plant. And right around 2002, we met Brian Ebercheski from then the Lung Association. And he was working on pushing for an ordinance in Chicago that would outlaw coal plants, and that sounded like a great idea to us. So through that local Green Party group, Jerry Mead and Jack and myself and others started working on that.
I just wanted to share an image of you and Jerry here. When was this taken?
That was taken a lot more recently than that period we were just talking about. That's about 2009, maybe, something like that. 2008, or maybe closer to 2016. I'm looking at the date at
when
the
the
bottom
book was published.
Yeah, I think it was maybe a year before, maybe a year or two before that. Yeah, sorry.
I actually wanted to read a passage from, this is from Carrie Leiderson's book, Closing the Cloud Factories. And Carrie Leiderson is a reporter, journalist, and essayist, I suppose, who covered the legacy of the coal and Fisk plants. But I thought this was painted a picture.
Oh, great.
Chicago's long, dark, frigid winter evenings can be grim, even in the most beautiful parts of the city. The southeastern corner of Pilsen at such times can feel like a sci-fi dystopia. Hulking vacant brick warehouses, weedy rubble-strewn lots caked with filthy snow, fierce wind tumbling metal debris down broken sidewalks, the coal plant emitting its gray plume. The late fall and winter of 2002 featured many such evenings. As people huddled inside their apartments, crowded around blazing gas heaters or even open stoves, Dorian Brewer and Jerry Mead were trudging through the neighborhood, clipboards and folders clutched in gloved hands, coats pulled tight against the wind, snow, and sleet. The two were knocking on doors, asking residents to sign petitions demanding that a referendum be placed on Chicago's municipal ballot, asking voters whether the coal plants should be forced to reduce their emissions. Convincing people to sign off on such a question might not sound like a formidable task. Who would not want cleaner air?
Right.
Not a tough sell.
No, it wasn't. Once we can actually get to people, I mean, that was the thing about walking around and getting signatures in Pilsen was, there's gates, there's multi-unit buildings. It was like, boy, it'd be 10 minutes between talking to people, maybe more. So you think about how many doors you knock on in 10 minutes, it's a lot. So maybe that, but anyway, yeah, it was tough work, and Jerry and I are close friends, and it's a little like being in the trenches or something when, you're never, you shared an experience that you both will never forget, and, no one else will really know what it was like, the pain in the face, but gosh, it was amazing, and we both loved it, and it was things like, a random, so you'd be out for an hour or two. I think we couldn't go much more than an hour at a time, and maybe we'd break up and then come back out for a little bit later and keep doing it. But we did that night after night. But there'd be like a family would, at first they were pretty suspicious of, who are these people, or were they trying to get money out of us? And then we'd tell them what we were doing, and we'd typically point over at the coal plant. And then once they realized like what we're doing there and how cold it was, a bunch of times we got invited into the house, offered tea and stuff. It was really nice. There's some amazing people. We just absolutely love it. But yeah.
I mean, I wanted to ask you too, because in spite of it sounding like an obvious question, perhaps it took a really long time and a huge amount of effort to actually get those shut down and not burning coal anymore. But I'm curious, since Pilsen does have a long history of being an industrial neighborhood, what was the awareness like? Were there other groups that were also fighting these polluting industries, or was this really a new idea that you guys were bringing?
I think totally new. Like, yeah, people were concerned. A lot of people would see the coal stacks. Sometimes they understood inherently, hey, that must be bad. But no, they generally didn't have a lot of understanding that maybe their air quality was bad. Later when we were doing work around the H. Kramer, campaign. But also we started hearing about it when we were talking about the coal plant was there were some families who were very aware of complaints, and they didn't even, I guess they were worried that there were health issues, but particularly when we were door knocking about the coal plant near the streets, near the H. Kramer facility, we would have these families who were very passionate, and they would point and say, coal plant, okay, but why aren't you guys doing anything about that? And then they would kind of point in that direction, and they were concerned, and they would describe like a wave of fog coming over. This one story they told us was the whole family, they had extended relatives over, they were filling the backyard, having a barbecue and a celebration, and it was a summer day, and all of a sudden this fog that was thick fog and then smelled metallic, and they were instantly concerned. They said, this isn't bad. So everyone wrapped up, came inside. They were furious. I think they said they got in a car to figure out where is this coming from, and they identified the H. Kramer plant. We now know to smell that much metallic taste in the mouth and to have that much fog, that dense, that far away, because this would have been 5 or 6 blocks away. It would have dissipated a bunch by the time it was wafting over their yard. You know, it's just, we know that I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves maybe a little bit, but with the H. Kramer, you know, we know that they eventually started reducing their emissions, but in the old days, they would just have tons of emissions coming out. But anyway, so yeah, to answer your question about people's awareness, yeah, you'd get pockets of awareness, but yeah, famously in the later campaign about the coal plants, we had one young man who, when we asked him about, there's a little movie that was made, when he was asked about the coal plant, he said, "Oh, that's bad? I always thought that was an air cleaning factory." So he actually thought it was cleaning the air. Anyway, so disturbed me.
Yeah. Public health campaign.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take a pause right now to let our viewers know that you're watching the P.E.R.R.O show on CanTV 21 and cantv.org. Today we are learning about the history of the Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organization, and I have Dorian Brewer with me, one of the P.E.R.R.O co-founders. I wanted to give some sense about the area that we're talking about if people are unfamiliar. But here you see this legend of industrial corridors, and then the cumulative impact score. This is a map from the NRDC, but here I think this is Pilsen and this is Little Village, if I'm correct. But this is the I-55 industrial corridor, and it's just so visually laid out, kind of the brunt and the burden that these neighborhoods have borne through industrial activity.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think, yeah, here we have the Zoom. So maybe you, this is getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
So tell me what happened then. When did you decide to formally become an organization?
Sure. So, that was 2002, and we were working with Lung Association, and then there was a referendum in our local area there in Pilsen. I think we did another referendum in Little Village that was our piece of that particular campaign. And later on, more like 2004, so a couple years later, we kept active with issues. But again, the people telling us about H. Kramer, we decided to start looking into it. So this is kind of 2003, 2004. And at that time, there was a website that gave scores for a facility, and it was using TRI data. This is Federal Toxic Release Inventory, I think it is, data. And it would take, this release data from every facility that was in the US EPA's database and then score it based on the chemicals for the likelihood to cause cancer, for example, and other problems. So you look that up, and H. Kramer was in the top 5% of most dangerous cancer-causing facilities in the country. Right there. In the country. Right there, like, with it a block away, across the street from where people were living. One of their stacks was across the street, so maybe 30 feet.
Right.
And anyway, so as we started to look into it, because of these neighbors that told us, I mean, there are a lot, as you said, there are a lot of facilities in Pilsen, so we didn't know to focus on one or the other, but it's the residents that were telling us, hey, we're here talking about the coal plant, but why don't you look at this H. Kramer facility? They didn't know the name of it, but they pointed to it. So we did start looking into it, and we found just shocking things like that. So the little group decided to, still under the Green Party, to have an event, a kickoff event, and we decided to invite the owners of H. Kramer to come and talk to the community about their facility.
Wow.
And we put flyers around and whatnot, and it was decently attended, and that was another thing where we would go door to door and door knock and give flyers and let people know. We came up with a ratio where for every person hour of door knocking, we would roughly get one attendee. So if you want 20 attendees, you have to spend 20 hours. So that's 2 people for 10 hours or 1 person for 20 hours. That was about our ratio of attendance.
I can relate to that.
But anyway, we had that first kickoff meeting. This was still under the Green Party, where we were concerned and working, H. Kramer was kind of part of our work, and we had this event, and Maria Chavez, for example, saw the flyer and she attended, and needless to say, we reached out to the company and they didn't show up, but we did have a placard on the table there in the front with, a representative from H. Kramer, and the chair was empty, so that was telling. But we had, it was a great event, and then from that, enough people then wanted to know, okay, we want to do something about it. So our next Green Party meeting was heavily attended with attendees from this first meeting, and they really wanted to focus on this. And part of the discussions of this interest in the issue, they said, really, it should have its own group instead of just being part of the Green Party. They didn't necessarily want to be part of the Green Party, which is fine. So we're like, okay, let's make our own group. So, we had several kind of kickoff meetings like that, and then this committee of people came up with the name P.E.R.R.O, and really it's a name that seems to have been created by a committee, and it was created by a committee. So it's kind of long. It sounds like it's a UN agency or something. No.
I love explaining it, and I love that the mascot of this little Mexican dog is so scrappy.
Yes,
The street dogs.
Yeah.
My mother's from Mexico City, and when I go down there, it always, it's very recognizable.
Yeah, right, that symbol, yeah. Jerry Mead should get credit for that, picking that symbol. But the name, was by committee years earlier. But so that's how it started. So really that H. Kramer work galvanized that group, and then we worked from there and focused on H. Kramer. Yeah.
Kramer seems to be like the first. Your first victory? That was. I know it was a long time coming as well.
Right.
But you won.
Yeah.
I want to show our viewers exactly the area that we're talking about. Could you tell us what the it's also, the EPA has labeled it the Pilsen area soil site or the Pilsen non-attainment area, and this is indicating lead contamination. What is that? How did it come to be identified, and what was Kramer's role?
Yeah, at first we did our own sort of citizen soil collection, and we found one location in our soil sampling, and we found a local place, a soil sampling place near the UIC area that agreed to do low-cost testing for us of the soil. One sample was, I think it was 92,000 parts per million, which was hundreds of times more than the allowable level. And that at the time that led to some more meetings, and the Illinois EPA agreed to do its own testing, but really nothing came of that. Later, P.E.R.R.O kept at it, and it was through the US EPA that really Maria gets credit for this. She ended up finding some folks in the US EPA that would listen to us and were sympathetic to us, and through that they became more active in paying attention to H. Kramer and to the neighborhood. And through that process, they agreed to do a US EPA soil sample. This was years later. And they found elevated levels of lead. And based on that sampling, they started a whole study that eventually led to what you're seeing here, which is the area around H. Kramer. Now that lead monitor is for air monitoring there, so that's a little bit of a different story than the one I just told. There are cross-hatching. Lead is a common thread, but that is air monitoring, but there's also the soil. So the one I just mentioned was the soil sampling.
Right.
But similarly, through Maria's efforts contacting the EPA, they, well, actually, in that case, the Illinois EPA, I believe, was tasked by the US EPA to say, where should lead monitors go? We're gonna install more lead monitors. And Maria heard about that and found out that the US EPA and Illinois EPA had no plans to put a lead monitor with these extra funds that were specifically for lead monitoring. There were no plans to have a lead monitor anywhere near Pilsen. In fact, the official line from the EPA was, well, there's one about 1.5 miles away. That should be plenty close. So obviously we objected to that idea. They agreed to put a monitor right on the PERRO school, which is that chart there, and which is only a 1.5 blocks or so from the H. Kramer facility. And sure enough, the elevated levels of lead in the air, and they would have spikes depending on the wind direction. It did suggest, based on modeling, that there was a point source of air lead fairly close by. I mean, we could have told them that, but you need to have, scientific proof. So that lead monitor on the PERRO school, showed that, and that triggered additional work by the EPA to then add another monitor on the other side, kind of upwind from H. Kramer. And processing all of that data showed conclusively that H. Kramer was the source. So based on that, the US EPA had a process where they pursued H. Kramer as the source and required cleanup operations from H. Kramer.
But it sounds like it took a lot of diligence on the part of P.E.R.R.O and Maria and...
Absolutely, yeah.
And what are, I know, or everybody knows, we don't drive with leaded gasoline anymore.
Right.
We can't have leaded paint in homes due to the risks of children eating leaded paint.
Right.
But what is the problem with lead, and why is it so, why do people get concerned about lead?
Sure. The primary problem with lead is it is a neurotoxin, and so particularly in growing children, it can have permanent, massive effects on the brain behavior for young children. It can have the same for adults. It's also a carcinogen, and actually it's the lead in the air that was that earlier statistic about cancer potential. So even its cancer properties were what first flagged it for us, but even more of a concern from a general public health perspective, the effects are, it causes learning disabilities and permanent a reduction in cognitive abilities for children. I mean, what is more horrific than that? I mean, it's just very high on the list. Additionally, they found elevated lead levels caused aggression problems as well in children, and then that's a lifelong trait. So, it's sort of like there are these other factors in a neighborhood like that would maybe help encourage some of all of those problems or be part of all those problems, but additionally they're literally having a chemical get in their bloodstream, that would cause these problems.
Cancer, learning disabilities, cognitive underdevelopment, lifelong aggression, disordered personalities. These are very major issues and concerns, particularly for being so close to a school.
Yeah, right. It's just absolutely horrible. So, and no one was monitoring this. No one's really looking. There was, for example, H. Kramer is operating on a permit, on a license where they're allowed to pollute. And when we looked at their permit, there was no, I think it was, gosh, I don't remember, but it was no limit. Like, they weren't required to have a limit. So actually, something we still haven't done as an organization that we can still do is force the Illinois EPA to issue a new pollution permit, 2H Kramer, that would set a limit. Now, at this point, they've been forced to, through legal action by the Illinois and the US EPA, they now have millions of dollars worth of cleanup and upgrades they had to do in their facility. They're operating at an incredibly low level, at least we think, of emissions. But technically, their permit is not limiting them from how much pollution they're emitting. There's other monitoring and whatnot, but the actual permit itself, they can, emit, which of course is horrible. They shouldn't be
Sounds
that
like
way. But anyway.
a lot of room for improvement
Yeah.
in policy here. So
Right.
we just have a minute left here, and
Sure.
I wanted to show just a couple more slides that
Sure.
I've got here. This shows the high amount of toxins that are found in the Pilsen neighborhood. If you look at, this is a so-called EPA region, but
Right.
I'm showing here an EPA Environmental Justice Screen report, and I'm also going to show folks how to make a screen for their own neighborhood in a moment. But this measures particulate matter, ozone, diesel, particulate matter, air toxic cancer risk, a whole bunch of indicators over here. And you can see for Pilsen, these numbers are all significantly higher than they are both for the state and for the U.S. averages.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lastly, yes, I just wanted to show folks that you can go to epa.gov/EJ-screen. The EPA has made this environmental justice screening and mapping tool available to the public at large, and I encourage you to check that out. Thank you for watching today's show. I'm Joshi Radin with PERRO. My guest today has been Dorian Brewer. Dorian, I'm thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for sharing some of these early stories. If you need more information, you can reach us at info@pilsenperro.org or 312-854-9247. And with that, I will say goodbye and put this information screen up here. Thanks.